This guy is from Philly. His name is Jim Cramer. He is the host of a show called Mad Money. And why do I have his picture up? I'm sure you're asking. And also, why are his thumbs up? I don't know that. So Jim Cramer is the host of a show called Mad Money, which is like a 30 to an hour minute show. Hour minute is not a phrase. A 30 minutes to 1 hour show. I'm not sure. I don't watch it because it's probably garbage. But you'll see him on Iron Man, and that's kind of where I know him from because he's like, oh, Stark Industries going down. Don't buy Stark Industry. He is a financial commentator. And he's a good example of what economics is not. He probably has some background in economics. He probably knows his stuff. But if you're watching Mad Money, you're not consuming economics. I'll put it like that. Finance and economics are related. I'd go so far as to say, if this is finance, this is economics. It is a much broader circle. People who study academic finance, I think, are economists, but not all economists know anything about finance. So, like, I went through 4 years of undergraduate education, not knowing anything about finance until I decided to take a finance course. I majored in economics and political science and had no background in finance. I couldn't tell a stock from a bond. And that's fine. Like I said, economics isn't finance, but finance, in my opinion, is a subset of economics. And some finance people will get mad if you say that, but it's kind of true. So, you can look at business news, and I actually encourage you to. That's why I have snacks down out there. But it's not a holistic picture of what economics is, because economics is way more broad. Like I said, you're studying decision-making under scarcity. And in as much as business news can relay decision-making under scarcity for a particular industry or particular business, or for a particular investor, right? You have $1,000 to invest. You want to make the most money on that $1,000. That's economics. But it's not the whole picture. So in my lectures, I'm not going to talk too much about finance. Maybe tangentially here or there if I find something interesting, but or if it relates to Snacks Daily and the discussion threads. But there's so much more going on. And just because you take an economics course, and this is any economics course, not just mine, don't expect to be like, the next Warren Buffett, because it's one particular niche of economics. Okay. A lot of economists will look at only their thing. So when I was in grad school, you had someone doing trade, like studying international trade, and they would only study one theory within international trade. Okay, and that's just how PhDs are. And then you had another person, he was studying macro, and he would only study how monetary policy affects inflation or something like that, right? Or, you have people studying kind of more random things like how we have one professor who studied the production patterns of methamphetamine, which is a kind of an off-base topic, but it was a very interesting lecture he gave. So, it can relate to finance, but it isn't finance. The two have their own domains. And I don't want you to take away from this course that you're, an expert in finance, because there's a lot more to go. Okay? And if you're interested in finance, I encourage you to take it. I actually now have kind of built a career in finance, so it is pretty interesting to me, and we can talk about it if you want to kind of sideline that chat, a Zoom session or something like that. But the two are related, but everything I learned in finance, I had to learn on my own. I in 10 years of economics, I didn't get any finance besides what I sought out for. Who are these jabronis? Okay, on the on the left, appropriately because he is the biggest leftist in history, is a dude named Karl Marx. You may have heard of him. If you go on Twitter for 10 minutes, whether you like it or not, or whether the person who posts it knows it or not, you're going to hear something repeated from Karl Marx. He is the foundational Marxist. His name is in the subject. If you've heard the term socialism, Karl Marx is he's not the creator of socialism because it actually was invented in America, believe it or not. The guy who made socialism a thing. Basically, he's the guy who popularized it. He wrote the Communist Manifesto. Socialism and communism are kind of interchangeable depending on to whom you're speaking. But he's like one of the greatest political economists of all time, in the sense of like his theories are still being taught today for better or worse. And I'm not, so when I say he's a great political economist, I'm not endorsing his theories. I'm going to be straight up. I don't believe anything he says. I shouldn't say anything he says. I don't believe the broader picture of what he says. I think it's not for me. But he has a lot of really good critiques of, the prevailing system. I think at the time it was still mercantilist, even though people call it capitalist. But that's a whole other discussion that I don't want to get into. But I use the phrase political economist, and I want to use that very specifically because economics in 2020 does not look like political economics. And political economics is, in the sense of like the way Karl Marx described it, would be more of like a blend between your history, your sociology, which is a field that he more or less created, your history, your sociology, your economics, your political science. Those four things kind of create this overarching, and philosophy is huge too. He's a big philosopher. These 4 or 5 fields create what's called political economics. It's a very kind of holistic field. It's not limited to economics. Today's economists are, like I said, kind of studying in their narrow view. And there's a whole range of methodology that goes into it. But that's all to say that what might have been considered economics in 1848 when Karl Marx was writing is a far cry from what you're going to get in this course. You might see a little bit of it in the textbook, but it's not really what economics is in 2020. They're describing everything using words. They're talking about things like class structure, which can still be taught in economics, but it's not really the focus. They're talking about things like good governance and philosophy, and it's not really what economics looks like today. On the right, and also appropriately, you have another guy, also a philosopher, also a political economist. Karl Marx is German. This guy is a Scottish philosopher of political economy. His name is Adam Smith. In 1776, he wrote a book called On the Wealth of Nations. And he's one of the major founders or one of the major thinkers behind capitalism. And his take was that, if you kind of let things lie, if you let them kind of progress on their own end, almost like an economic form of anarchy, people will act in their own self-interest. And in doing so, versus a top-down approach, if you compensate them for acting in their own self-interest, you actually get a more productive society. And, again, we can talk more about that particular theory. But again, it's something that you see cited a lot today. In both of these cases, I think they're very dated theories. and there's a lot more nuance that we've kind of like learned in the 250 years since Adam Smith wrote and the 180 years since Karl Marx wrote. But these are the kind of like the broad philosophical underpinnings of the systems that we have today. And in both cases, these are genius scholars who wrote great works, and they wrote long works. And I don't think a whole lot of people have actually read both of their big manifestos. In Marx's case, Kapital, and in Smith's case, on the Wealth of Nations. Besides chapters here and there, and that's all I can say for myself. But again, it's not something that's presented in economics courses in 2020. You'll see them in probably your political science courses. That's where I saw them. You'll see them in philosophy courses. Again, I saw them kind of in. I didn't really take philosophy courses in undergrad, but in reading philosophy as an adult. I guess I was an adult in undergrad too, but you know what I mean. And you'll see them in sociology. Well, you'll probably see a lot more Marx in sociology than you will Smith, because sociology, in my opinion, is a little left-leaning, and rightfully so. Karl Marx kind of started the field. On the right-hand side, you'll see more of this guy, Max Weber. All digression, though. The point is, political economics, as you might understand, is the debating of philosophies of communism versus capitalism, isn't really where economics is in 2020, besides some places like Twitter or maybe Paul Krugman's blog, right? But it's not. You won't see it in academic papers, and you're not going to see too much of it in this course, though I do highlight it in when I have the extra credit for the Commanding Heights. These guys are kind of stand-ins for two broadly capitalist thinkers, but Keynes and Hayek are like the Commanding Heights people, and Keynes kind of is a little more left-leaning, not to the extent of Karl Marx, but more so than Hayek, who's probably more to the right of Smith even. But you don't see too much debate between communism, capitalism, and economic papers. So you're not going to see too much of it here. Besides the fact that I do think it is important, again, to get like a well-rounded education in economics, even if it's not academic economics. You kind of want to understand what is being discussed popularly, even if it's not discussed by the broader academics. All right, who's this jabroni? This jabroni just had his birthday the other day. He is a big fan of this guy over here, this Adam Smith dude. He's also a big fan of that dude Hayek that I just mentioned. Both of those two are both more political economics. So that guy Keynes that I mentioned is kind of straddling the boundary between, academic and political economics. It kind of started turning between like the 40s and the 60s, between, in the early part of the century, there was really not a whole lot of math done. And then you had like what's called the marginal revolution. And then towards the 40s, Keynes kind of, wrote these political economic theories that eventually did get math to them. And now in 2020, one of the bigger schools of macroeconomic thought is called neo-Keynesianism or New Keynesianism, which are basically the same theories that were described in words, now provided with math, and with the additional benefit that when you have kind of a quantitative background behind it, you can make very more specific predictions about how to handle things like inflation and unemployment. Anyway, so this dude his name is Ron Paul. His little buddy, his son Rand Paul's in the Senate right now. He's a senator from Kentucky. He himself was the senator from Texas for a while. He presents himself as an economist. He presents himself as a doctor and a politician first. And then secondly, like a big lover of economics. But when you actually look at what he's reading, it's these dudes like Hayek and Smith and von Mises and Bastiat. These dudes who are writing in the early 1900s and earlier, who are, in my opinion, political economists who don't have any quantitative study to them, which is okay. Like you can have that, but I don't think it's necessarily relevant. At any rate, he's a politician first and foremost, and I want to stress that when you have like when you take an economics course, and this is at least where I was, in 2008 when I took my first economics course, I'm like, I'm going to learn all about how to tax efficiently and how much to provide to social services, and I'm going to learn the philosophical underpinnings of capitalism and all that stuff. And that's either philosophy, political economics, or politics, depending on what the particular bent that you're going for is in that particular question. But I want to separate politics from economics, and the two are obviously related because you have people who look at politics in economics, and you have politicians who pretend to be economists or who have studied economics or who create economic policy. But there is a big distinction in the sense of like economists are looking at things from an academic lens and they're looking to inform policy, but politicians first and foremost are looking to get votes, right? Even if they have the highest goals, and I think this guy, whether you agree with him or not, I think he was trying to be a good politician and a good policymaker. But first and foremost, politicians are trying to like placate a base, and they're often using bad economics to justify their policies, or they're using decent economics but with their own bent. And there's a whole lot of philosophy that for good policy, like they're like, even if you have a good policy, if you have differing philosophies on that, it could be a bad policy, it could be a good policy, right? Like take this particular guy, he's what's called a libertarian. He doesn't believe that you should take away anybody's rights, even if it's better for society as a whole. If you create the ideal libertarian policy and you have economists say, given that these are your objectives to maximize rights, subject to the government's budget, someone with a different philosophy who's saying, no, we're maximizing social well-being, we're maximizing the overall equality, even if it means taking away someone else's rights, would say that's a terrible policy. In this case, you have two separate objectives, and the economist can tell you how to maximize those objectives subject to a budget, but they can't tell you which objective is better than another. They're subjective. And well, like I said, that kind of boils down to philosophy. So economics can inform political questions, but it's not politics in the sense of like, if you come at politics with a philosophical mindset, you can have two great economists disagree completely, and that's just being human, right? People have different philosophies, and I don't have the background to tell you how to philosophically scrutinize different objectives, right? To say that a rights-based approach is better than a fairness-based approach. Those two things are depending on a person and depending on the person's philosophies. And I have opinions on that, but why would my opinion be any better than someone else who's taken an introductory philosophy course, right? I can't tell you how to do that, even if I might be better at economics than your Joe Schmo, right? So economics is different than your finance people. It's finance might be a branch of economics, but you're not going to get really a holistic view of finance. It's different than your political economics, which kind of has your philosophical and sociological and historical and political components, and is also kind of a little bit dated. And it's different than politics, which also has like a philosophical bend, but also is first and foremost about, getting your voters to agree with your policies more than it is to create the most efficient policy subject to some sort of constraint. Okay, so there is a little bit of nuance in what economics is, but if you stick to the definition of you have an objective, you have a budget constraint, then you want to determine who gets it, how it's produced, and what is produced. Then if you stick to that, you'll have a pretty clear understanding of what economics is.